Let me introduce to you our distinguished speakers, panelists from Syria, to hear more about the situation for children. I welcome Mr. Ala Zaza, founding member of the Hurras Network, a Syrian child protection network. They have more than 100 staff trapped in Ghouta. Also welcome Mr. Haitham Osman, director of the NGO Children of One World. They work with child protection. They have 300 staff on the ground in Syria. I also welcome Mr. Ibrahim Al-Qassem, lawyer and founding member of UNAMO for Justice and Human Rights. They work with forced disappearances and children in detention. Mr. Zaza, you have the floor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really hard for me to describe the gravity of the current situation in Ghouta without repeating words of condemnation and despair. For years now, civilians in eastern Ghouta have been besieged by the Syrian regime forces and its allies. The access of humanitarian aid convoys, even those called for by the UNSC resolutions, have been denied. It has been starved and deprived of basic life necessities. Civilians, including 115,000 children in this area, have been systematically and indiscriminately targeted by all types of cowardly weapons. This crime has been committed before in other places in Syria, where large civilian condensed areas were heavily bombed over a long period of time, with the aim to force people to negotiate a forced displacement deal, where as a result children are uprooted from their houses and sent to the unknown. More than 3 million children have been displaced and sent to just another area, waiting for just another mass punishment. After years of struggle to bring the children in eastern Ghouta back to school, the recent brutal attacks have rendered all those efforts to a halt. In the first week of February only, 5 schools were directly attacked, forcing the Education Authority to suspend all education. Despite all those horrors, and just until the recent escalations, the children in Ghouta kept going to underground schools. They kept playing amongst the destruction and rubble. They kept breathing the oxygen, or what's left of it, after the repeated chemical attacks. They kept waving goodbye, sometimes with amputated arms, to whom is left alive of their loved ones. They kept dreaming of skies ornamented with colorful kites instead of war jets. They kept hoping. And those children are asking us very clearly why the world is still watching this and doing nothing. And we are asking on their behalf why the institutions responsible for the protection of civilians and children have failed over and over again. Ironically, it seems the bigger the crisis is, the more paralyzed those institutions appear to be. Ladies and gentlemen, when we are invited to such a high-level panel, we're always asked to make solid and practical suggestions. We are asked to present doable actions that would be applied within the current system, within the balance of power, within the international norms. Our children are being killed in eastern Ghouta as we speak now. If that's not terrifying enough, I assure you that a lot of other children will continue to be killed the same way. Yet the same broken system will continue to be applied, and more of those doable actions will be presented, supported by millions of meaningless emails, reports, and panels. While real and solid actions, revolutionary approaches, will be ignored and deemed unrealistic and naive. The famous death of Aylan Kurdi shocked the world in 2015. The picture of his 3-year-old body washed up dead on a beach went viral on social media and news network. The compassion with him that was inflamed at the beginning was extinguished quickly by the loud noise of those calling for the protection of the European house from the misery of refugees. Again, practical procedures were needed, the leaders have met, agreements were signed, and the naval fleet was ordered to sail, not to save the rest of the children, not even to pressure the perpetrators to cease the killing and lift those medieval sieges, but to close the door in the face of those fleeing the war. This is how the major humanitarian crisis of the century is being solved today. What would actually save the children is to bring down this broken system to allow for a new humanitarian and justice system to be built on its rubble. A system where humanitarian workers will actually stay in besieged areas instead of evacuating just hours before a new attack starts again. A new justice system that would actually bring war criminals to justice, where it will be punishable by international law to close the borders in the face of refugees, and where members of a Security Council will be elected and not enforced upon the rest of the world just because they are more armed than others, just like street gangs. German poet Holderlin said, "Where there is danger, there grows also what saves." And what is growing now in Syria is not just fear and hatred, but also the call for justice and peace, and the rejection of war itself, of all wars and weapons and their promoters and apologists. One of those voices I want to share specifically is the voice of my friend and colleague in Eastern Ghouta. She shared with us what she thought would be her last message, her last cry to the activists and human rights defenders among you, to work hard to eliminate the veto power from the Charter of the UN Security Council, the tool that allows few privileged to control the fate of the majority of people on earth, and allowed many war criminals to commit the worst crimes of modern age. Ladies and gentlemen, if the system is broken, and we all know it is, so let us please call it as such. Let us just for once, instead of presenting more figures and statistics and procedures and doables, let us try to give real answers to the following questions. What are you really going to do if another chemical attack was carried out? What collective solid action will you take if the siege and the airstrike continues? I mean actions that do not force the people of Eastern Ghouta to leave their homes. We have done all what we can to protect the schools. What are you going to do now if another school has been bombed? How are you really going to save the tens of thousands of humans from the horrors they are living now inside Sednaya prison or other human slaughterhouses of Syria? How are you going to bring those criminals to international justice? Approaches and norms is part of the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, we are slaves of this procedural way of thinking that masks and disguises the approaches that might actually work, the approaches that we critically need. Albert Camus said, "I've always held that if he who bases his hope on human nature is a fool, he who gives up in the face of circumstances is a coward." And my colleagues that are trapped in Eastern Ghouta are neither fools nor cowards. We will continue to do with whatever resources we have to bring back our children their rights, not just their temporary needs that can be covered with some food baskets, but their basic rights as children. We will continue to document the violations and war crimes, hoping that someday a better justice system will prevail, where our testimonies will actually be of value. We'll continue to be the voices of those victims who have been silenced not just by the tyranny, but by apathy. By a justice system that has been unresponsive to ethical demands, and by a humanitarian system that has become detached from the human rights and transformed into a cold